We are doing Journey, a tribute to Duncan Browne. And if you haven't heard of Duncan Browne, keep listening. You'll soon find all about the late, great Duncan Browne. Duncan Browne sadly died on May the 28th, 1993, and his career spanned from about 1967 right up to his death in 1993. So over 25 years, he recorded 7 albums. One of them was released posthumous, and one of them was in a band called Metro, released in the mid-70s. So we're going to cover his career, and to help us cover his career, we've got a whole array of guests, friends and colleagues of Duncan Browne. First up, we'll be talking to Nick Magnus, who was in charge of taking care of Duncan Browne's posthumous album, Songs of Love and War, which was released soon after Duncan Browne's death. Hello, Nick Magnus in London.
Hello.
It's a Duncan Browne Tribute, and as one of his collaborators, we're going to be talking with you about Duncan. But first of all, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a keyboard player and composer and producer. I've been one of those professionally since about 1976, when I joined a progressive rock band called the Enid, you probably know about in Australia. And then from 1978, I was the keyboard player for Steve Hackett, who was the guitarist in Genesis. From 1978, the Steve Hackett band started, and I worked with Steve for 12 years, actually, up until about 1990, all the tours and studio albums.
We're here to talk about Duncan Browne, and You're one of his collaborators. Can you tell us where you first came across Duncan Browne, and had you heard of Duncan Browne before you met him?
Yes, I had heard of Duncan. I knew of Duncan way back when Journey first came out.
Right, so, that was the hit single in the early 70s.
That's right, yes. So I knew of Duncan for a long time, but I didn't actually meet him until about 1985 or 86. I was the lodger in the house of a friend of mine who was a singer, Debbie Doss, and she was a friend of Colin Blunstone, so I knew Colin because through Debbie, and of course, naturally, Duncan was a friend of Colin's, and so eventually it had to happen that one day Duncan would come round to our house, and we met and sort of made instant friends. Within 5 minutes, it was like best friends.
You became instant friends, and did you start working together immediately, or tell us a bit about that process there, Nick?
We didn't start working straight away, but I had a small studio set up in one of the rooms in the house, and so of course, I showed them the music set up, and it was one of those, we must do something together one day things. Of course, so one day ultimately we did, and I think it was basically one of Duncan's TV jobs that he was working on. In the quest for an affordable studio, I suggested, why not do it here? We'll work together, and so we did, and it all went extremely well. And so sort of working partnership was forged straight away. So you had a good personal relationship and a good working relationship. That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, it was great. I think Duncan, of all the musicians I've ever worked with, Duncan was... I think he really comes as the person I was most able to feel completely unself-conscious with.
What was that about him that made you feel like that there, Nick?
It's very difficult to say. It was just him. It was just such a friendly, affable person. We had we had the same sense of humour. Quite often difficult to get down and do any work because we'd just spend so much time sort of giggling and joking before we could do anything. It was, I suppose we better work now.
Well, it's funny because we've done lots of shows here, and everybody we've asked to be on this tribute has, yes, when, just been jumped at it. Obviously that Duncan was very well liked.
Oh, incredibly. I mean, yes. I think everybody that met Duncan just really, really liked him. I mean, you couldn't not.
So he wasn't a temperamental musician then?
No, not at all. Not in the slightest. I find it hard to imagine or even remember a moment of Duncan getting cross or losing his temper. Everything was very laid back and very kind of just unstressful, unpressured. And we would sit there, like the self-consciousness thing. I mean, personally, I often find it quite difficult working in close one-to-one thing with other musicians because I just get embarrassed that you're sitting working something out and you're making loads of mistakes and everything, and suddenly you feel bad about it, and the other person starts feeling bad when they sit and play something and they make mistakes. But with Duncan and me, that never happened. In fact, the mistakes became enjoyable. We'd have a good laugh about it, and you just never felt bad. You could sit there and play acres of rubbish before you got to the good bit, and you never once felt awkward. And that's a really rare feeling. For me, it was, and I think Duncan felt the same way. So we really enjoyed working together. It was great, and of course, loads of loads of productivity came out of it.
Nick, did you know when Duncan first contracted cancer? Because I believe he first got the cancer in the early 80s. Not early 80s, late 80s, sorry.
It was the late 80s, 4 years from, about 4 years from the first diagnosis of when the diagnosis was cancer of the colon.
It was a great shock, obviously.
It was a huge shock. And
how did he take it?
Very bravely. I keep thinking, had it been me, how would I have reacted? I think I would have fallen to pieces, and lots of people might. Yeah, and Duncan didn't. It was like, well, they said I've got this, and I'm just going to really change my lifestyle. He just thought, I'm not going to let this get me, and I'm going to change my lifestyle. And he did. I mean, he made lots of dietary changes, and he did have an additional, he had an operation to start with to remove a piece of colon, and he seemed to come through the other side of that really well, and it looked like he was really getting better, and there was a whole period of a couple of years where he just really seemed, in the middle of it, where he seemed so healthy, and it kind of went to the back of everybody's mind, I think. It was, obviously, I don't suppose it went to the back of his mind. But I think, I just thought, oh, well, good, he's over it. That's great, that's terrific, and just forget about it. And then when it crept back, it had turned out that the cancer had sort of returned and had metastasized and gone to his liver. That was when the alarm bells started ringing, and of course everyone was saying, "Oh gosh, cancer of the liver. Nobody gets over that." And even so, I still thought, well, no, it can't. They can't be right. It's Duncan, and they can't kill off Duncan. That's just not in the script. But it just seemed to sort of snowball after that. And he seemed okay for up until a couple of months before he actually died, and then the last couple of months he just deteriorated unbelievably fast.
Did he lose a lot of weight?
He did, yes. He lost lots of weight, and but he remained cheerful right, until the last day I saw him, which was about a week before he died. He came around here, and he was still game to do some work. He had his guitar with him, and we plugged it in, and we tried to do some recording, but he was too tired. Basically, he was trying, and he was just saying, "I can't do it. It's just too difficult." But he, even like up until a week before, he was still prepared to say, "I'm not interested in this illness. I want to just carry on and do what I do." And I think it was that incredible fighting spirit that was just really, said everything about it.
Finally, I want to get on to the album, Songs of Love and War. Nick, you were designated to finish it off for Duncan. Yeah. Is that correct?
Well, yes, we did. We had plans to do an album, very, very grandiose plans, which I think at the time we knew we'd never be able to afford. But we never made a sort of rush. We never rushed towards trying to do it, partly because of the cost of hiring studios and other musicians and things like that. As I say, the plans were very grand, and we wanted to use other musicians, which meant recording them in environments that would cost money. But then when Duncan's illness returned, we actually had some not particularly willing discussions, but we felt we needed to talk about what happened just in case. And he said that he really wanted to know that something was going to come out, that if he died, which he still refused to admit was going to happen. He said, if it happens, I really would like something to come out as just a kind of like last statement. And so, of course, we knew that the songs that we'd been working on, because obviously we'd been making this, like the demo or sketch versions of the songs, which were songs like Skull Twins and the new version of Journey and Rainer and High Windows and romantic comedy and things, where they existed in the form that they are now on the album. But we had always planned to redo them and improve them if we could ever afford to do it. But so we said, well, those will have to be included. And there were a couple of pieces from the TV stuff that Duncan did, which he really wanted to include, like Saraband, which he always thought was wasted as a piece of TV music, and he was right, it was much too good for TV. And after that, it was really a question of discussing what of the remaining tracks went on with Duncan's family and friends, really. So it was discussing with Eton Music and with Lynn and Sebastian and Nick Potter and Colin and everybody, just picking the tracks which we thought would be nice to include. This was after he'd died, because we never got so far as discussing that when he was alive. So we thought, what would be the things he would really like to have, and what existing recordings do we have that are usable? So we found, basically, once we decided what they were going to be, I had to track down as many of those things as I could, and basically either repair them in some way, because they were, inevitably some of those were demos as well, or on sort of fairly sort of noisy tape, and so I had to clean them up, and on a couple of occasions I was actually able to do some overdubs to finish them off.
How long did it take, Nick, to complete after his death?
It was a few months. I couldn't actually get started on the project for some months afterwards because it was too difficult, emotionally difficult. And in fact, it was really weird when I put the first tape on, multi-track tape that we'd been working on, and I put it on, and there was like, one of the tracks had an open mic, open vocal mic, and there was Duncan just chatting away to me over the speakers as if he was just in the next room, and it was really difficult. I just had to stop the tape and go, I can't do this.
Nick, just to interrupt you, we've had Ray Manzarek from The Doors on the show, and they did an album called An American Prayer featuring Jim Morrison's poetry, and the Three Doors got back together again to add music to Jim Morrison's poetry, and they said it was just such a spooky feeling, and there was bits of conversation like your example with Duncan, and it spooked everyone in the studio, and it was like he was there back from the grave. So
and there was a very, in addition, while I was actually working on the tracks, there was an additional feeling that Duncan was there, and I'm sure that the Doors would have had a similar thing, that feeling that Jim Morrison was actually there. I felt Duncan was actually here, and there were certain things, like I would try and do something. I would think, I've got an idea for a little part, if I was doing an overdub or whatever, or putting an effect on something. And I thought, I'll try this. And it was like, if something didn't work, it really didn't work. It was like Duncan was there sort of screwing things up that he didn't like, that he didn't approve of. Like I'd think, I'll put a reverb on this. And suddenly the reverb would break down. Just like spontaneously break down. Or you think, I'll sync up this device, and the device you were going to sync up would break down. And this wasn't just once or twice, this was a constant set of things. And at the moment you thought, I can't do that now, I have to do something else, and finally got something where everything behaved, the things that had broken down came back to life again. It was like, it was almost like he'd been there and turned them off so you couldn't use them. And I know it all sounds very bizarre and silly, and people go, yeah. But it really was like that. It was like having a guide, because sometimes I'd be sitting there going, I don't know what to do with this. I'm not quite sure what I should do. What would Duncan like? And I suppose mostly, because our tastes were so similar, it wasn't that difficult to figure out what he'd like. But it was a question of figuring out what he wouldn't like to happen, and it kind of sorted itself out, because every time I thought of a dubious thing, as I say, it broke down.
Well, all right, Nick, we've got to leave it there. I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk with us on our Duncan Browne Tribute.
Well, great pleasure.
And wish you all the success in your career as well.
Thank you very much indeed.
And it's our Duncan Browne Tribute Journey, a tribute to Duncan Browne. Hello, Sebastian Graham Jones.
Hello.
Nice to talk to you, and thanks for taking time to join us on our Duncan Browne Tribute.
It's a pleasure and a privilege. He was a hugely important person in my life, and I miss him daily. So it's a joy that people are interested in him, because I think he was a huge personality and a great talent, and he's horribly missed. But it's absolutely thrilling that there's interest in him. It's deserved, I think, but it's wonderful to hear that people are still aware of him and of his work and his output and what he was up to.
Well, I think the quality of the music speaks for itself, and I think that's why it stood the test of time, even 10 years after his death.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, he was. I think one of the things about him that was extraordinary was that he was. he was kind of ahead of his time in a way, and
maybe people are catching up right now.
Well, I guess that's right, and the music wasn't, the best of his work was not transient. It wasn't ephemeral. It was always going to be there for ages, forever. I think, because that's the way he thought of his work, without pretension. He knew that he was going to make a difference. I think a lot of the frustrations that he went through in his life were to do with the fact that it was quite difficult to find the right kind of acknowledgement, not fame and glory and dollar signs, but just the opportunities for someone like him were restricted because it was such a specific but enormous gift and talent, and he was extremely demanding of himself primarily, but he was quite difficult to talk about him no, it's not, it's really easy to talk about him, it's quite difficult to talk about him without sort of bursting into tears, because he was terrifically important to the people who knew him properly.
And I think his music has touched, like Michael Piper was telling us, his music has touched a lot of other people as well as his close friends like yourself.
That's right. I think it did, and I mean, but part of that, as I say, I'm repeating myself, but part of that is because it wasn't transitory. It was music that was going to stay there, and it doesn't fade in a curious way. It doesn't date. It was partly because it was ahead of its time, some of it when it was made, but also because the kind of commitment that he had to the standards that he demanded of himself and his friends and close associates like myself was very exacting, and you knew therefore it wasn't going to be something you could just listen to while you were cooking. It had to be something you paid attention to.
Sebastian, if you could briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you first come to meet Duncan?
Sure. I'm 56. I was literally the same age as Duncan. I'm a theatre and film and television director. I've worked, all over the place. I've been at it since I was 20, and at the National Theatre here in London and in America and all over the place. That's what I do. I met Duncan in 1969 through the lady I was married to, who had been at drama school with him, who was called Victoria Fairbrother. They'd been at Lambda together. And I met him, 69, 70 I met him.
Was she an actress as well?
She was an actress, yeah, and they'd been at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art together. And she introduced me to him because she thought that they were great friends at the drama school. And she had it in her mind that we'd get on, and she brought him round to meet me, and within 10 minutes, literally, we knew we were friends for life. It was very, very extraordinary. And
just to interrupt you, Sebastian, it's funny you should say that, because Nick said exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, he was very, well, I'm not surprised. I mean, he knew who he wanted to have in his life, and he knew it sort of straight. He had a kind of weird instinct for people who he knew were going to matter. And he made it, you couldn't avoid it. And it wasn't a hardship at all, it was a massive privilege. And we started to play music together. I'm not nearly as talented as he is as an instrumentalist, but I've got, we were able to work together in a very deep and powerful way because I didn't threaten him, if you see what I mean. He was a genuine freak virtuoso. And I'm a very good accompanist, and so we knocked what we did together over the huge amount of time we worked together very, very closely on all sorts of strange projects. Some totally successful, some troublesome and didn't quite get there. But it was never less than a hugely powerful relationship based on liking the same things, if you see what I mean. Me finding him extraordinarily. He had a way of bringing the best out of the people who he wanted to do such a thing too, if you see what I mean. And he was a real inspiration in that way. And people, it's like, I guess it's like sort of playing tennis with somebody brilliant. You do actually, your game comes up because somebody's challenging you. We found an instant affinity about all sorts of things. It wasn't just the music and the art, but it was also about literature and about food and about wine and taste and people. We found that we just were really soulmates. It was very, very extraordinary, and it didn't fade.
Lynn did mention he was a good cook as well, that she was spoiled.
He was a wonderful cook, and,
Yes.
and we spent a lot of time together, he and I, planning things while cooking. You see what's happening. I mean, a lot of creative stuff happened in the kitchen, again, it was very much like that was sort of, it was hugely part of his style. He was a perfectionist, and he was whatever it was that you were up to had to be done to the absolute, to the best of its possibilities, whatever it was. And that was what made him, so fantastically entertaining and stimulating, but also, in the best and most loving ways I can possibly express, it also made him completely infuriating, which was a joy, actually.
So how was his temperament? Did he have the classic artistic temperament?
He had no arrogance, but he had fantastic sureness. And he wasn't a bully at all, but he was very, very demanding, but primarily of himself. And, if it wasn't right, it absolutely wasn't right, and he'd throw it across the room if it wasn't right. But it was never anything less than, I sound a bit sort of saccharine here, but it was never anything less than a pleasure, if you see what I mean, although a tough pleasure, to collaborate with him, because you knew that what you were going to get up to was going to be, if you got it right, it was going to be terrific and would last, whether, as I say, whether it's a bowl of spaghetti or whether it's a
piece of music.
A piece of music, or and when he worked with me in the theatre and on the television, his taste was always just impeccable. I mean, even when it wasn't his area, if you see what I mean, he'd look at somebody's acting or something, he'd say, "Wait a minute, have you got another take of that? Because he's not very good in that bit." And he was 98% of the time right, which was fascinating.
Pretty good. Now, Sebastian, we know your collaboration with Duncan on Travelling Man. What other projects did you work on that?
We did. Well, Travelling Man was a big one. We did a whole lot of work in apart from Travelling Man. We did a series called Shadow of the Noose, for which he wrote the music, which I directed, and there's the theme from that, which Isabel Buchanan sang, who's a wonderful, great Scottish opera star, and he wrote this thing, Salva May, which was the theme for that, which I think is one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written.
I think Lynn said that was played at his funeral.
Yes, it was, and it's just extraordinary. It's a fantastic piece of music, and it came about because he and I had always had a dream that we wanted to write a mass together. Not because we were religious or anything, but because it was something he wanted to do. We never got around to it, but that was going to be part of it. It's just stunning. It makes my hair stand on end still. At the time.
I'm not really familiar with Shadow of the Noose. I'm not sure if it was shown in Australia. What was it about?
It was a great big BBC sort of costume series. It was about a Victorian barrister called Edward Marshall Hall, who was a real guy. It's not fictional,
right.
But it was a drama series based on this bloke's life. He was a world famous barrister.
Okay.
And the theme music, which Duncan, and all the rest of the music in it, which Duncan wrote, was just astonishing. And
it was a mini-series or
it was 8 hours of it.
Oh, okay, a mini-series, yeah.
Yeah. For BBC Two, it was a big success. And
who was in it, Sebastian?
Oddly, an Australian actor called Jonathan Hyde. Well, he's Australian by birth, but Jonathan Hyde, who's a big star, was in it. He played the leading part, and Michael Feast, Terry Taplin, all sorts of people. I mean, it was a big do, but the music was very, very extraordinary, and it was an exceptional piece of work. And then other things we did together. We did several plays for the BBC. We did 2, 3, 4 plays in the theatre together. We were writing a musical about Casanova, which was a long-running project, which we never got completed because he got ill. But in fact, it came back to life again, and I collaborated with somebody else using some of the music that he and I had written, and it got workshopped as a production here in London and caused quite a big stir.
Has it been made?
No, it hasn't.
No.
We did a workshop production of it, but it's one of those projects that's still there, and it's at some time, if I've got the nerve, I'll return to it. It's one of those things that's there. He left it in a curious way as my responsibility to deal with that thing. He never said that, but he implied it, because it was something that we treasured and worked at very, very hard for a long time. It was on its way like anything, and then when he got terribly ill, he just hadn't got the strength to pursue it any further than that. We got a hell of a long way with it, but never to completion.
And Sebastian, Travelling Man, what was that about?
Travelling Man was a Granada television series, 13 hours of it. It was about a policeman who had been wrongly discredited, prosecuted and sent to prison for something he didn't do.
Was it a contemporary drama?
Yeah, and as the series started, it's him out of he's released from prison and he's back in the world, and the story was of his search to find his son who's disappeared, and also to kind of bring the people who had stitched him up to some sort of justice. It wasn't frightful. It had violent moments in it, but it was a very beautifully written and actually terribly well acted story. And the trick about him was that in order to keep himself, the central character, to keep himself, as it were, free and anonymous, he lived on what they call here a narrow boat, which on the canals. So he didn't have an address, he couldn't be found. And the music came about, Duncan's music came about, because the author, who's a great friend of mine, when we were doing the initial sort of thinking about it, and Roger Marshall, the writer, was starting to sketch it out and the style of it, and we were talking one day, and I said, what are we going to do about music? And he said, well,
Get Duncan Browne.
I had Duncan Browne on my sleeve. I just wanted desperately to bring him into the theatre and television in a formal way, because I knew he was itching to do it, and to do that kind of, to expand in that way, because he was finding the, in quotes, the rock and roll business and the pop industry sort of discouraging and dim. But I knew he had this astonishing other talent that just needed to be deployed. Anyway, the writer said to me, I just have an image of the central character, he said, kind of on his own, blowing into a milk bottle, making that sort of hooting noise, because as he looks at, the landscape or something. And 2 days later, I was talking to Duncan, and he said, I've just got a new Roland keyboard, and he said, I found this incredible sound on it by accident, which of course was panpipes. And that was exactly the answer. So it was mysteriously dead on straight away, and we wrote the music together for it, but it just fell out of us in the most... He led it, but the inspiration, he was the central driving force of it. We played together the whole thing and wrote it all together. It was just this amazing, a classic Duncan Browne magic moment where, I walked in with a sketchy idea and he had the answer. It's absolutely astonishing. And we went on happening that over years and years, and so many things came about like that. I mean, I remember doing a play in the theatre, and I was on holiday in Italy thinking about the play and coming back to rehearsals. Duncan was going to write the music, and I hadn't got an instrument in the house where I was staying in Italy, but I had a tune in my head, and I just whistled it to myself over and over again just to try and keep it. I sketched it down, on a piece of paper, but I'd got no recording equipment, I hadn't got an instrument, and I came back to London and went to see him and whistled the tune. He said, oh, fine, I've got the setting for that. I said, wait a minute, I haven't finished whistling it. And he knew exactly what it was I was going to do, and that piece of music, that score for that play, was done in about a day and a half. He was a magician. He knew what you meant, and he was able to sort of catch the thought in the most, mysterious and inspired way. It was very, very beautiful. He was just astonishing.
All right, Sebastian. Well, thanks very much. We're out of time.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope I've been some use, and I hope, above all, that you can feel that, the true affection and love I had for him, along with other people. I wasn't the only one in the world. And Lynn is a great friend of mine, his widow, and we miss him terribly. But thank God, we've got all the music.
Yes, we've got the music to remind us.
Absolutely. And it never stops being played in this house, I can tell you. and my the ladies that I've been with in my life, the mother of my son, it was a great fan of his, and Susan Fleetwood, who was a wonderful British actress who I lived with for 16 years, he adored, and she died of the same thing that he died of.
Dear.
Pretty much at the same time, pretty harrowing. And my partner now, Alison, who's a BBC lady, who she met when we were doing the BBC series, and she absolutely loved him.
Colin Blunstone in London, England. Hello, Colin Blunstone in England.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us. So we're here to talk about Duncan Browne, and
Right.
I want to start off by asking you, how did you come to meet the late Duncan Browne?
Well, we were both doing a TV show in Berlin, and I was just walking down the corridor where all the changing rooms were, and I heard Duncan playing the most beautiful classical guitar. I'd never heard anything like it before. And it's not like me at all. I'm a pretty shy person, really. But I just knocked on the door, and I just said, that just sounded fantastic. And he was a lovely guy, very easy to talk to, and we found we've got lots in common, and while we were in Berlin, we just became mates. And we found that we got friends in common back in London.
By coincidence?
So, yeah, just complete coincidence. And so we met up again in London. And after a few months, he mentioned to me that he was sharing a flat with another guy who became his manager, his first manager, Patrick Lacey. And they had, it was a 3-bedroom flat, and there was just the two of them. And so, after a period of time, I kind of, I became a flatmate of the other two, and it was a fantastic time.
To help out with the rent.
Help out with the rent, and we all played guitar a bit. I mean, Dunk was absolutely superb, and Patrick and I were, okay players. But it was wonderful. We just played all day and often most of the night. And I learned so much about songwriting from Duncan and guitar technique. He was a really fabulous player.
What was this show in Berlin, Colin? Do you remember?
It was, I don't, to be absolutely honest.
Was it a pop show? Was it a pop show?
It was a pop show, yeah. And it was just promoting singles. And I was just, personally, I was going around Europe. I'd left the Zombies, and I was just starting on a solo career. And I was going around Europe doing TV pop shows promoting a single.
Were you Neil McCarthy at the time, or?
I wasn't going to mention that, but I'm afraid I was. I'm afraid I was. I was using a false name, which is a rather complicated thing to get into. Using the false name, not talking about it. Just an idea that my producer had at the time, and I went along with it. So I became Neil McCarthy. In fact, if I hadn't have heard him playing classical guitar in his dressing room, we probably would have never spoken. I mean, you don't sort of socialise that much at TV shows, really. It's all a bit of a rush.
No, especially with stars' egos.
Well, it can get a bit difficult. Yeah, you never know whether you can approach people or not. Personally, I tend not to. But it's not because I'm standoffish. It's just because I know it can be a tense time in a studio, in a TV studio, and I just don't want to get in the way. So, but I just felt I had to introduce myself. It was just such a fabulous sound that when he was playing.
And how long did you three share the place together?
We shared it for about a year, and
was it a harmonious household?
Yeah, it was really. We were all very interested in music, and Dunk, he'd made one album, which was Give Me, Take You for Immediate Records, and he was looking for a new deal, so it was a kind of an in-between time for him. He was writing a lot, and I was just trying to establish a career as well. I think the Neil MacArthur year was coming towards an end, and I was just starting to really begin a solo career myself. So it was a kind of I don't know what to say really, an in-between time for us, a recharging of batteries where we were writing songs prior to our new solo careers, because Dunk eventually signed to Rack Records and had a huge hit in this country, and that was the start of a series of albums that continued through his life. Not all of them had hit singles on, but all wonderful albums.
And was it by coincidence that the hit single was Journey, and your album around the similar time that Duncan played on was called Journey?
Well, it is just a coincidence. I'll be absolutely honest with you, I didn't choose the name for my album. The record company chose that name. Normally, I think on nearly every other album, I've chosen the name, and I always try and get involved in the artwork of an album sleeve or a CD sleeve, as you would call it now. But that particular one, I think I must have been on the road, because I was travelling a lot. About 73, I think that album came out. And it was sort of presented to me as a finished article, really, which wasn't, very satisfactory. But it's a complete coincidence. I don't know whether my album I think his single came out before my album, but I don't know if there was any if there was any copying going on. I think it was just a coincidence.
We've been talking to Sebastian Graham Jones and Nick Magnus. Both mentioned that a lot of synchronicity happened when Duncan Browne was around. Sebastian was after a certain piece of music and Duncan just happened to get it spot on immediately. Just this sort of amazing instinct, or I don't know what you'd call it.
Well, I guess that's what it was, yes. And I think that it is very interesting that alongside of all these fabulous albums that he made, he did have this breadth of work that he completed in film and documentaries, and he did seem to be able to come up with the goods when people gave him a brief of what they wanted. He could just do it. It's just a talent that he had, because he was interested in a very wide spectrum of music. His background was probably more classical music, but then as he grew older he got more interested in, you know, sort of folky music, and then eventually he went into quite roaring electric guitar as well. He had a lot of musical experience to draw on when people wanted him to supply music for them.
And Michael Piper also mentioned to us that he also did a bit of glam rock with the Metro album. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes,
yeah.
I think there were 2 Metro albums, and it was glam rock really. But I mean, Dunk was always interested in and why not, in the good things of life, you know. I mean, he loved fine wine and good food and really nice clothes. I mean, he always looked great. And so glam rock, I think, would have come very easily to him. I really like them. I prefer his solo stuff, but I do like the Metro albums.
That day in Berlin, when you heard him and met him, were you aware of him as a recording artist, or that was the first?
Not then, no, I didn't know him at all.
Obviously, you continued being friends right up to Duncan's death. I just wanted to ask you, Colin, did Duncan tell you that he was ill there in the late 80s, or tell us a little bit about, if you can.
Yes, what happened was he was ill a couple of years before he died. Say 2 or 3 years before he died. I'm going from memory here. Lynn obviously would than I do. And he seemed to recover. I guess that with cancer you talk about remission, don't you? And I thought he was well. I thought, you know, it was all over. He was going to live to a good old age. And I didn't know that he was taken ill again until quite close to when he died. I don't know if many people did know, but I certainly didn't know. It was a real shock because I thought he'd made a wonderful recovery.
But sadly he didn't. Michael Piper, who was on the show beforehand, mentioned that you were doing a thing with Duncan called Camino.
Yes. Well, Sebastian Graham Jones was writing a lot with Duncan, and a lot for TV actually at the time. And I think I phoned Duncan and just suggested we got together to just to see if we could get some tracks recorded. I didn't have any specific idea about who should write them. And as he was working with Sebastian at the time, it became a sort of a trio, and we demoed a lot of their songs they'd written together. I think we probably demoed 8 or 9, maybe more of their songs, and we did play them to some record companies, and we got some very positive reactions, but it didn't go any further than that. We didn't actually get a deal offered to us. When Duncan died, some of those tracks were put onto a sort of a retrospection album that was put together.
Songs of Love and War? Was that
That's right.
That
and on
Magnus
some of those tracks,
yeah.
most of them Duncan sings, but some I sing because I don't think he ever put a vocal on them. Where possible, we used his vocals. So that was the story of Camino, really. I would think over a period of 2 years, we recorded quite a few tunes and had a really good time. I'll just tell you a story of the first time we tried to demo some songs, and we went into a very small demo studio, and obviously the speakers were blown in the studio. They were, a rather distorted sound was coming out of the speakers, and I wondered whether we'd get through the day in this studio. But we were having fun, so we just stuck at it. And in the middle of the afternoon, a guy arrived with some big cardboard boxes, and I thought, oh great, so the guys arrived with new speakers. We're saved. But what it was, Duncan and Sebastian had arranged a wine tasting in the studio. So I started unpacking the cardboard boxes, and it was all bottles of wine that we then started to try, and then the speakers sounded much better after that. So it was always fun recording with them. It was always great fun.
Did you, between Journey and the Camino project, did you do anything else with Duncan musically there, Colin? Or?
Yes, often if I'd written a song, myself for one of my albums, I would ask him to come in and play it because he was a much better guitarist than I was, but I played in the same style as him. Obviously, through the time we shared the flat, I watched very closely.
You were copying him.
I copied him, if you like, but it wasn't a conscious thing. His playing was just so wonderful that you couldn't help but be influenced by him. And so if I was recording a song of mine and it didn't readily fall into a group-type setting, I would ask him to come in and he would play. And a song that a lot of people remember is actually from that Journey album that Duncan played and I sang with the King Singers, and it's called Let's Keep the Curtains Closed.
It's a great track. I believe Stereolab covered, or Duncan played with Stereolab as well. I don't know if you were aware of that, Colin.
No, I wasn't actually.
It must have been just before he's died. I hope we've got our facts straight. But anyway, Colin, I want to let you go. Thanks for taking time to talk with us. And Duncan's been dead for 10 years now. If you could sum him up as a person, and why do you think that, because I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but everybody I asked to be on the show jumped at the chance. When you gave me all those phone numbers, they said, oh yes, we would love to. It would be an honour. And I mean, trying to get people to talk isn't always that easy. So What was it about Duncan, in your opinion?
Well, I think he was a wonderful character. He's a very generous person in all senses of the word. And I'm sure everybody remembers him very warmly, and also regrets very much that a unique talent like that should die so early in his life when he could have gone on and done so much more. And I think it's important that people hear what wonderful music he wrote and played, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. They want other people to experience his music in the same way that we have.
Well, I think Sebastian Graham Jones has been doing that with all his girlfriends.
Right.
Just playing Duncan Browne music until they submit.
I was going to say, it's very romantic stuff, so I'm sure he has a lot of success with his girlfriend.
Well, good luck to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, Colin, I want to thank you very much for
it's
taking
my pleasure.
time to talk to us on our Duncan Browne Tribute.